Hi, I'm Mike Irwin, and I'm the fire chief here at Springdale Fire Department. I've come to you today to read a book to you. The book is titled Johnny the Fireman. Johnny the Fireman was written by Rebecca Sprinkle, and it was illustrated by Ruth Wood. So we'll go ahead and begin reading. Hopefully you'll enjoy the actual story. Johnny lived in a big apartment house in a big city. Around the corner there was a large fire station. When Johnny and his mother passed the fire station on their way to the grocery store, Johnny always looked in. He saw many fire engines, bright and shiny red. He saw many firemen spick and span in their blue uniforms. Everything and everybody was ready to put out a fire when one started. As he skipped down the street toward the grocery store, Johnny always said to his mother, "When I'm big, I want to be a hardware store man like Daddy, but I want to be a fireman too." "I suppose you'll just have to decide," his mother told him. "You'll have to decide which one you want to be most, a hardware store man like Daddy or a fireman." But Johnny couldn't decide. The next summer, Aunt Janie invited Johnny to come for a visit. His mother and Daddy took him in the car and left him for 2 whole weeks. Aunt Jane lived in a tiny little town in a tiny little cottage. Around the corner there was a fire station, a very small fire station. The first morning Johnny was there, he walked down to the station and looked in. There was one shiny red truck. There was one fireman in a blue uniform. "But where are all the other firemen?" Johnny asked. "One fireman can't drive the truck and hook up the hose and turn on the water and get out the ladder and put out the fire." The fire chief smiled and said, "You just wait and see. Wait till there's a fire and you'll find out." Johnny waited and waited. It seemed like there would never be a fire. Finally, the day before he was to go home, the fire whistle on top of the building actually started to chime. Johnny hurried out to Aunt Jane's tiny little cottage and stood where he could watch. Now he would see how one fireman could put out a fire. But as he watched, he saw several men suddenly running fast toward the firehouse. For when the fire whistle had started to blow, the butcher had dropped the pork chops he was cutting and dashed out of his store with his white apron flying in the breeze. He raced to the fire station. The filling station man rolled out from under the car he was greasing and went running towards the fire station without even wiping his hands. The baker in the bakery pulled a pan of cinnamon buns out of the oven so that they could not burn. Then he dashed off to the fire station without taking off his tall white hat. The cobbler left the shoe he was half soling and raced out on his apron. And the hardware store man dropped the box of hammers he was unpacking and ran around the corner as fast as he could go. All the men who had raced to the fire station now jumped onto the one bright, shiny red fire truck. The fire chief in his blue uniform jumped into the driver's seat. He roared the motor and shifted the gears, and away the fire truck streaked up the street with the siren sounding. Johnny raced alongside the sidewalk behind the fire truck. He saw it pull up 2 blocks away where a little store was sending out big puffs of gray smoke. The fire chief pulled to a stop. The butcher jumped out and began to unfasten the hose. The baker attached the hose to the water hydrant. The cobbler carried the hose inside and sprayed water on the flames. The filling station man got the ladder off the truck and put it against the building. The hardware store man climbed the ladder and crawled in through the window. The fire chief was in charge and told each person what to do. Suddenly, the clouds of smoke disappeared. The hardware store man stuck his head out the window and called, "All clear up here." The cobbler ran out the front door and called, "All clear down here." Then they rolled up the hose, hooked up the ladder, and everybody climbed back on the truck for the fire had been put out. Just then, the fire chief saw Johnny standing and watching. "Hop up, Johnny," he called. "We'll give you a ride home." The filling station man swung Johnny up to the seat by the fire chief. The other men stood on the sides and back of the truck. The chief roared the motor and shifted the gears. He turned on the siren so that Johnny could hear the nice, loud noise, and they streaked up the street and into the fire station. Then all the men, the cobbler, the baker, the butcher, the filling station man, and the hardware store man, hopped off their truck and went running back to their regular jobs. "Now you see what happens," the fire chief told Johnny. "In this little town, we do not have enough money to pay several firemen to spend all their time waiting to put out fires. So we have volunteer firemen. They are men who offer to be helpers when there is a fire. Most of the time, they are the butcher, the baker, the cobbler, the filling station man, or the hardware store man. But when there's a fire, they are firemen. Next day, Johnny's mother and daddy came to get him, take him home with them. After he had given them each a big hug, he told them about the volunteer firemen who helped when there is a fire. He smiled at his mother. Now, Johnny declared, I don't have to decide whether I'll be a hardware store man or a fireman when I get big. For I am going to live in a tiny little town like Aunt Jane's. Most of the time, I'll be a hardware store man like Daddy, but I'll be a volunteer fireman besides so that when there's a fire, I can be a fireman too. The end.